Hey y'all, this is Matt. Jen and I were in the middle of filming our presentation, Midnight Sun, about energy storage when the power went out here in Austin, Texas. Um, the temperatures are very cold outside right now, about 5 degrees Fahrenheit and about 35 degrees indoors. We don't have power or heat. Right now I'm just trying to stay warm, lighting the place up with my little camping lantern there. And don't know when this is going to end, but I can tell you this is a prime example of why we do need energy storage and how that's going to help us build resiliency and in fact how when we do resume filming, we're going to talk about this and about how energy storage could have helped alleviate some of the problems and why it's important to get storage at both the individual and at the utility scale. So we look forward to finishing this. We'll see you on the other side. Hey y'all, we're back. After 4 days in the dark and cold, we both have power again. We're both safe and we are ready to rock. Jen, are you ready to rock?
Absolutely.
All right, let's start by introducing ourselves. I'll go first here. My name is Matt Sparks. I am an entrepreneur. I'm the founder of Capital Toolbox and other businesses. At Capital Toolbox, we provide fractional CFO and consulting services to small businesses, including some startups in the energy storage and clean tech space.
Hi, Jen Gallegos here. I have an environmental engineering degree from Stanford University. I'm a licensed engineer here in Texas, and I currently work at Yada Energy. We're an energy storage company based right here in Austin, Texas.
So we've structured this presentation as an interview. You don't need to be an energy industry insider to follow along and to get value. We're going to keep it pretty high level for you, and we're not going to get lost in the weeds. We've made sure to keep it valuable and fun for the South by Southwest audience. We've also left some time at the end of the video today for a live Q&A. And without further ado, let's just jump right in here. The big elephant in the room is the Texas power outage. And don't worry, we'll definitely dive into that in a moment. But first, let's start with the basics. Jen, can you tell us what is energy storage and why does it matter?
Sure. So energy storage is a means to save or store power that's generated ideally, but not necessarily by renewables, and to use that stored power at a later time. Energy storage matters for a couple reasons. First, renewables are intermittent. We hear it said all the time, the sun isn't always shining and the wind isn't always blowing. Second, energy storage matters because of a term called curtailment. What that means is in states where you've got lots of solar generation capacity, say California, for example, the grid infrastructure that's existing cannot handle any excess solar generation capacity. And so on days where you've got lots of free electrons being generated by the sun, grid operators in states like California are having to curtail or shed that load. So they're wasting those free electrons. They're basically throwing them away because there's no place to store them for later use. And right now, the US generates about 11% of its energy from renewables. About half of that comes from biomass, and wind and solar comprise about 4% of the US energy generation. Without energy storage, we can support about half of the electric grid with renewable energy. However, when we add energy storage to the equation, we can support 100% of the electric grid with renewable energy. That's why it's so important.
And right now, the idea of 100% of the grid being supported with solar, wind, and other renewable energies with storage sounds pretty great because of last week. I know I personally went without power and heat for about 4 days, and I know you did too, Jen. So let's get into it. What happened with the outage in Texas? How could energy storage play a role in preventing future disasters like the outage that we just experienced?
Yes, so the short answer really is even in an oil-rich state such as Texas, the demand for energy here far exceeded the generation capacity, period. The long answer is that the power grid failed, the Texas power grid failed primarily because roughly 30 gigawatts of power from natural gas, coal, and nuclear plants went offline. There were frozen supply lines, frozen wells, lack of a variety of winterization features at these facilities. And for those of you that don't know, Texas only has a total of about 68 gigawatts of total energy production capacity. So when 30 gigawatts went offline, it was a huge blow to the Texas grid. And folks, this was so serious that as reported in various news outlets, including the New York Times, the Texas grid was seconds or minutes away from going completely dark, meaning that Texas would have been without power for weeks, possibly months. This is totally crazy, but definitely on the brink of an even more catastrophic disaster. Without power last week, we had a series of overlapping and cascading disasters in Texas. For one, we have the pandemic, of course, but then came along a deadly winter storm that knocked out both our power and water systems for days across the entire state. All of this happened while making roads impassable. People couldn't get food, hospitals couldn't get access to water, some were without power, trucks couldn't make deliveries, people couldn't heat their homes or businesses, and as a result, dozens of people died due to freezing temperatures and carbon monoxide poisoning. Properties also suffered lots of damages because pipes burst at alarmingly high rates, again, because power and heat couldn't be provided to buildings. However, if we had more energy storage, people could have stayed warm in their homes, potentially preventing people from dying, water pipes from bursting, refrigerators from defrosting, medical devices from shutting down. Businesses with energy storage could have stayed open. Many people could have continued to work last week, which would have prevented billions in lost productivity. Power couldn't be maintained at some water processing facilities, which only worsened the situation. But with energy storage, we could have at least provided power to these water processing facilities so that we could maintain a potable water supply. And if that wasn't possible, then people with energy storage in their homes could have at least boiled water once that water supply was no longer potable. Power and water were also becoming intermittent at critical facilities, including some hospitals. We had EMS and hospital staff that were then forced to transport patients to nearby facilities as the road conditions, and weather continued to worsen. And with energy storage, we could have actually kept the power on at these critical facilities, including hospitals. Analysts are predicting that losses from property damage and lost productivity from the outages last week will exceed $50 billion. And just to be clear, this was a man-made disaster, not a natural disaster. Many regions are able to withstand winter storms without these cascading breakdowns that we saw in Texas. Texas was not prepared, plain and simple. There wasn't insulation at power plants. The industry had been deregulated, and buildings did not have the type of insulation that's necessary for these types of winter storms. This is only part of the story, though. The other issue is that the Texas grid, like the other two grids in the US, and like many throughout the world, they are old, in disrepair, and in serious need of updating. We need to modernize the electrical grid to prevent disasters like this in the first place, and energy storage is a critical part of the solution and the conversation.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. Something that you mentioned, both storage at the like individuals home or at the home level, but then you also mentioned utility scale type solutions as well, both of which would have been helpful. But there are really, there's a whole spectrum of different types of energy storage technologies out there, and they all serve different applications or different needs and different customer types or end users. And any one of these could have helped during this outage. Can you tell us a little bit about the different kinds of energy storage technologies that we currently have, and also maybe some that are coming down the pipe as well?
Sure. I'd like to, before I dive into the question, you said something really important previously. Just talking about, we've got a variety of different types of customers and a lot of different situations that energy storage could have helped. While today we are going to go over, many technologies, I'd like to say that we're going to need all of these technologies. We need a portfolio of solutions because this is such a big problem. We have so many different niches and areas that need to be served that there's not going to be one winner. There are going to be a variety of solutions, and there are going to be many folks in this industry that are doing great things. So I just wanted to highlight and emphasize that point that you brought up. So thank you so much.
Sure, and there already are. I mean, we've not filled in the entire spectrum. I mean, there's a lot of stuff missing, but there's already a lot of different types that are out there doing really cool things. So I would say that it's already happening, and compared to 10 or 20 years ago, the growth and the R&D and the development and research in this space has just been amazing.
Right. And so with that, let me go into some of the different types of energy storage technologies that we're seeing. So one that everyone's familiar with is battery energy storage. This includes many different types of chemistries and many different types of different components for these chemistries. There are also flow batteries, which are included in this category of electrochemical energy storage. There's another type of chemical energy storage, which actually stores energy in a gaseous form. So typically it uses hydrogen or methane to store that energy, again, for later use. There are also ultracapacitors or supercapacitors. These are typically used in UPS or uninterrupted power supply systems for things like your data centers. This is good for power intensive technologies. So you need really short charging and discharging times. You need a burst of power, but then you also need to be able to recover that quickly. And this is a form of electrical storage. There's also pumped hydro. This is where you've got water that sits, say, at a low elevation reservoir. And if you have overgeneration that's happening through, say, wind turbines, that surplus electricity is then used to pump water up a hill to a reservoir in a higher elevation. The water will then just sit there until it's needed. So at the time that it's needed, it'll be released down the hill. That then turns a turbine, which then creates electricity. We've also got compressed air energy storage. This is where air is pumped at high pressures down into the earth or into caverns. And then over, say, the next 24 hours, that air is released. And then again, it causes a turbine to spin, which then produces electricity. There are also some emerging technologies out there. One of them is a company that's actually storing heat in really small cells. This process, though, takes up large areas and large spaces, but this is a form of long duration storage. So think storage that lasts weeks or months even. There's also a technology that I call Lego mountains. So you've got folks that are building up tall superstructures with actual building blocks with excess energy. And then as energy is needed, these superstructures are then allowed to disassemble in an organized fashion to release electricity. And then finally, there's another technology that uses molten salts. And in different forms, this process is another form of storing energy.
Yeah, some of those seem like they're straight out of sci-fi. I've read about some pretty wild ideas and projects that people are working on. There's something that I've noticed and I've read about as well, that in general, this isn't true across the board, but in general, the ones that tend to be the most successful and that tend to be adopted more quickly or at a wider scale is technologies that fit a form factor that we're already used to. So if it's pumped hydro, for example, it's pumping up water into a reservoir. It's often right next to another reservoir that's right on the river already. And so people are like, oh yeah, I know what a reservoir is. There's one here and there's just another one. So that makes sense to people. Or similarly, if you can fit it inside of a building that just looks like an office building, or even just a battery. People know what batteries are. Okay, sure, I can put a battery somewhere. And so the ones that tend to be successful are the ones that fit what we already know how to work around in our lives and in our societies. So while there are a lot of different kinds of technologies, they do have different value streams. As they all fit into this spectrum, and some applications fit in over here, some fit in over there, longer term or more expensive, or they're all different needs of the end users. So why do we have such a wide spectrum? And or maybe another way to put it, what are the biggest value streams that you see for people who do want to install energy storage systems? What are the different benefits to installing a storage system?
Right. So there are a lot of different value streams. I'll just start out by saying, and I'll go over some of the major ones, but if you have lived through an outage, if you have lived through something like we did in Texas, a lot of what I'm going to say is going to make a lot of sense to you. And whether you're a utility or a commercial business, or even just a residential homeowner. So let me just cover some of the high level items. So first, I would say in terms of benefits, it's energy storage allows you to reduce or eliminate electric bills when you pair that with solar, for example. Energy storage also allows you to do shifting your time of use charges and demand charges. So you get to use energy price arbitrage to your advantage. It also is a way to provide backup power, so commonly known as resiliency. And again, just thinking back to last week, that is something that Utilities would have found extremely valuable. Commercial businesses, again, would have also found valuable. Government buildings and, residential folks would have found that extremely valuable. And there's also improving transmission and distribution at the utility scale. There's improving overall system reliability at both, again, the building and the utility side of things. Energy storage is a way to help with meeting company-wide net zero carbon emissions goals. And finally, it's a way to create a microgrid that can be independent or mostly independent of the grid. Again, there are a variety of benefits that impact everyone from the utility to the commercial payer to the residential ratepayer, again, to government organizations.
Sure. I know that you've mentioned several of these benefits for the type of clients or customers that your company, Yada Energy, works with, or the technology that you guys have. Real quick, can you share what kind of batteries or energy storage that Yada Energy makes?
Sure. So we actually focus on the commercial commercial and industrial rooftops. So think businesses that are installing rooftop solar that don't want to install, say, a container system. And so what they can do is use our modular and distributed energy storage solution to actually fit right under industry standard solar module.
Oh, okay. So you've mentioned some of the value streams or some of the benefits of energy storage, but it's not all roses, because any products have environmental impacts. And so can you discuss with us a little bit of the environmental impacts of energy storage manufacturing?
Yes. And this, because energy storage is such a new field, we are only scratching the surface with the environmental impacts specifically tied to energy storage and manufacturing. So first, I want to touch upon supply chain. As the industry grows, one of the areas that we really need to examine closely is supply chain. We need to look at what the impacts of materials and metals that are used in that process. Cobalt, for example, is commonly used in energy storage batteries. However, it is a scarce resource that's mined in countries such as the DRC, where you've got significant environmental, humanitarian, financial, and political risks. So some battery chemistries, such as the one that our company uses, do not contain cobalt for that very reason. The second reason is that we need to design for the end of life. And what I mean by that is an energy storage system needs to be designed with recycling in mind. We need to create better recycling processes because less than 5% of all batteries currently get recycled. And we will have millions of storage systems that are needing to be recycled in the coming years. And the materials in these old units could help reduce the amounts of metal that we need to mine. There are some companies out there right now that are working on new ways to recycle these batteries, to actually extract the metals so that they can be used again. We need more of that type of innovation, but we also need to design to make it much easier to actually recycle at the end of life.
And we need to make those processes more energy efficient. There are some cool companies out there that are working on that problem of recycling energy storage and batteries in general. But it's a tricky process and tends to be very energy intensive. So we do need some innovation in that space as well.
Absolutely. One other area that we need to look at in terms of designing for end of life is actually making it easier to recycle batteries from EVs. So as an example, there's a company out there, Aceleron, that's making EV battery containers. Because right now what goes on is you've got these battery cells that are welded together, and then that welded piece is then welded into an EV. This makes it really cumbersome and difficult for an owner to actually remove that battery and get it replaced in their EV vehicle. Well, Aceleron is hoping to change that with their EV battery container. They're hoping that this container, which communicates with a typical EV, and basically allows you to swap batteries in and out as they become, as they reach their end of life. And I know I've spent a lot of time on batteries, but there are other types of energy storage that we've got to look at in terms of environmental impacts. Some battery chemistries are toxic, which are potential issues once they do reach their end of life. Do we just throw them in the landfill? I would say that's not good enough. We've got to do better. We've also got to look at other types of storage, such as pumped hydro. What sort of land is going to be required? And what's the impact to the local flora and fauna of a new pumped hydro facility? Is there a better way for us to install energy storage than to disturb, say, existing environmental flora and fauna?
Sure. And there's definitely a lot of cool stuff happening in that space, which kind of brings us to the next question I have, which is what are some of the most exciting trends that you are seeing in the energy storage industry?
Yes, so it's a really exciting time to be in the energy storage space for a number of reasons. The first, solar and wind, for those of you that don't know, are the cheapest sources of energy right now. But again, they are intermittent. They've grown faster than any analysts have predicted. And remember, energy storage will continue to accelerate that growth. It allows all of these intermittent renewables to go from an intermittent source of energy to a dispatchable source of energy. Another exciting trend is the rapid industry growth. The current market size is about $1 billion a year for energy storage and around $170 billion a year for EVs. I mention EVs because they're a mode of transportation. But again, we also have to remember that EVs are basically batteries on wheels. As the technology evolves, as it improves, and as more EVs are deployed, EVs have the potential to be a game changer for energy storage down the road. By 2035, so in roughly 15 years, the estimated market size will be nearly $2 trillion per year. That's $500 to $600 billion per year for energy storage alone, and $1.4 trillion per year for EVs. So for those of you that are following, that's 500x growth for storage and 8x growth for EVs in the next 15 years. Wow. Okay. But it doesn't stop there. So in Q3 of 2020, that's the most recent quarterly data that we have, US storage installations increased over Q2 and all previous quarters by 3.4x or 240%. In other words, despite a pandemic, late 2020 smashed the record for storage installations by a wide margin. And as amazing as that was, 2021 is expected to see even bigger gains still in the storage industry. Storage is where solar and wind were, say, roughly 10 years ago, and we can anticipate similar trend lines. I'd also like to note that historically, Most of the industry's focus on storage has been on utility scale projects and technologies, say systems that are 1 to 2 megawatt hours and bigger. So really large systems, think peaker plants, for example. But moving forward, we're finally starting to see a shift towards much smaller projects and on technologies that scale downward. So think anything below 1 megawatt hour scale. As an example, these are storage systems that can be deployed on a single commercial or residential building of any size. My company's signature product, the Solar Leaf, is a good example of this. The last trend that I want to talk about is one that we may have heard of. It's called electrifying the grid. This basically means replacing combustible fossil fuel energy products and processes with electric powered versions and powering these with renewables. So we've got, as an example, you could say internal combustion engines being replaced with electric vehicles, or in your home, if you've got a natural gas water heater, that would be replaced by an on-demand electric water heater.
Sure, and China is a really good example of that. Do you know about the city bus fleets in China?
Right. So let's, yeah, that's a great example of electrifying the grid. So China, about 10 years ago, took on the challenge of electrifying its city bus fleet so that these could then be part of an electric grid. And as of 2019, China had more than 400,000 electric buses, or 99% of the world's total, as compared to a dismal 650 electric buses in the US. So yeah, this is a great example of a country taking the lead on and getting serious, to be honest with you, about electrifying the grid. If we want to do that here in the US, we have got to overhaul our mass transit system.
Yeah, and when we take on these projects, there tend to be multiple benefits. So there's grid resiliency and efficiency, but there's also, I mean, one of the reasons why China did this was to reduce air pollution, and I don't just mean carbon, but I mean just particulate matter in the air to reduce smog, and that has been a big help for that in Chinese cities. So those are some of the interesting or positive trends. But what are some of the biggest challenges or impediments to the growth of the energy storage industry that you see? And what are some of the biggest challenges for growing and getting to mass adoption?
Right. So, it is an industry that's poised for a ton more growth. But there are three main challenges that I see. The first challenge is access to investment and capital. Hardware, for those of you that don't know, is really capital intensive. It's very challenging, very time consuming. And investors traditionally have a preference for software because it can scale much more quickly and because it doesn't take as much capital. But we've got to remember, we're talking about energy here, folks, perhaps the biggest market in the world. This is because everyone needs access to energy. And as I mentioned in my previous point, energy storage will soon be a $2 trillion per year industry. So hardware, yes, does take time. Hardware, yes, does cost more. But with investment and access to capital, it can be developed much more quickly. Mm-hmm. The second challenge that I see is deploying the technology. Often emerging technology companies are working with utilities and corporations to deploy technology, say in small scale or pilot level demonstrations. This is great, But utilities and corporations operate much, much more slowly than agile, smaller startup companies. If we want to get serious about reaching our climate targets, we've really got to take another look at how we're interacting with these emerging technology companies. If you're a corporation or a utility out there and you're looking at jumpstarting your innovation, I suggest that you look at investing in these companies to give them a boost, or potentially even purchasing these companies. Again, we do not have the time to deploy this technology over 10, 15, 20 years. We've got to get it out in the field. We've got to test it. We've got to see what works. Mm-hmm. The last challenge that I see is tied to policy and incentives. Right now, energy storage doesn't really have its own policy or its own regulatory category. And as a result, what we're seeing is, for example, battery storage peaker plants have to meet safety protocols for fossil fuel peaker plants, even though this doesn't really make sense, or it may not even apply to battery storage. We're also seeing that storage only qualifies for the investment tax credit if it's paired with a solar installation. So even if you have a solar installation that's pre-installed, but that wants to have storage, you wouldn't qualify for that investment tax credit. We've got to look for new ways to develop these categories for energy storage so that they're no longer shoehorned into categories that are not the right risk profile, that don't have the same benefits. We're starting to see these types of changes. It's very recent, but we need to see it happen at a much faster pace.
Absolutely. Now, as you're talking about these three areas, it struck me that economics are really a core factor of all the issues in the industry. So let's talk about that. When do the unit economics pencil out for energy storage? And how far away is this technology from being financially and commercially viable?
So it already is, at least at the utility scale. We are already seeing battery powered peaker plants compete with and win contracts for peaker plants against fossil fuel powered technologies. There are plants that battery powered plants that have been installed, that are in the process of being installed, and that have recently won contracts. This is already happening, and this is happening without incentives at the utility scale. Storage also pencils out at the residential and commercial scale in states with incentives, such as when energy storage is paired with solar, so that you've got a storage system that qualifies for the investment tax credit. This is quite common, and it's referred to as solar plus storage.
Okay, but when does storage pencil out at the building scale without incentives?
So if you had asked me this, say before the Texas ice and snowstorm last week, my response would have been, at the residential and commercial scale, it depends. There are a lot of factors in every project that impact profitability and project payout. But if you did live through that Texas ice and snowstorm last week, the answer is the very first day of that storm. But even if you haven't experienced an outage, energy storage projects, could pay out anywhere from as little as a year to as long as 10 to 15 years. Again, all that said, costs and prices are coming down rapidly, and the economics are going to keep improving. The costs that we're seeing today at many early stage storage startups in 2021 will be reduced by upwards of 50 to 75% in less than 5 years. And that's without incentives For example, at my company, Yada Energy, there are a lot of factors that go into pricing any given project, but our energy storage product that we're launching in the next few months, roughly speaking, will be around $1,000 to $1,200 per kilowatt hour without incentives. And we are aiming to get that total installed system cost to the customer down to around $300 to $400 per kilowatt hour within the next 5 years. And of course, without incentives, the cost to the end user will be even lower. I do want to highlight, again, going back to the outages that we experienced here in Texas. When you do have times of outages, when energy is being priced at exorbitantly high rates, as they were in Texas, as they have been in California, the payouts are much, much quicker in less than a year. And I would even argue over the course of that storm. Again, you're talking about making sure that you can be productive. You're talking about not losing inventory. You're talking about not sustaining enormous damages to your buildings and facilities.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. So if the economics already work, does this industry really need incentives? Does it need tax breaks? Does it need subsidies? Why or why not?
Yes, absolutely. The industry needs incentives. Some states in the US have issued energy storage mandates, California, Massachusetts, to name a couple. But we are living in the middle of a climate crisis, and we're behind on all of our climate targets. While the storage industry may grow on its own, anything that we can do to accelerate decarbonizing the grid is a big win. The incentives can potentially help us get back on track with our climate targets. We've also got to remember that government incentives and financing help de-risk a market, showing investors that a technology is stable enough to invest in. If we think back to solar, that's exactly what happened during the Obama administration. And this needs to happen now for energy storage.
And that's if I can interject, that's a big part of the reason why solar is so successful right now, why it's growing so rapidly, why the technology has advanced so much in recent years.
Absolutely, that's exactly why, is because there were incentives during Obama's administration that helped investors see how good of an investment solar was. And the previous administration was hostile towards clean energy and storage. However, the Biden administration is very pro-clean energy. They've already issued a variety of executive orders, including rejoining the Paris Climate Agreement, and are working on policies to give renewable energy and storage a boost. I'd also like to note that fossil fuels have received billions of dollars per year in various incentives and tax subsidies. And this has been going on for decades. The most recent data showed that the fossil fuel industry received $650 billion in a single year.
Per year. That's not just 1 year.
Right. This is a single year. This doesn't even count absurdly cheap land contracts that are handed out to fossil fuel companies. So, in order to keep the playing field level and fair, energy storage absolutely needs incentives. I also want to point out that if energy storage had, $650 billion a year in incentives, in access to capital and investments, we would be so much further as a nation, as a society, in our technologies. We could already be nearing that 100% clean energy target that we've been eyeing for such a long time.
I 100% agree. I was playing devil's advocate a little bit with that question. Um, the we only have about time for one more question here, maybe a couple more questions. I know one big one that many folks have probably been waiting for here is, what action steps can an individual or a company take today to implement storage as part of making the switch to 100% renewable energy?
So there are, a number of things that folks can do out there. First, if your organization or company has a corporate social responsibility department, go talk to that CSR department head, and also talk to your building's operation manager. Start understanding what your building's electricity usage is. See what sort of solar plus storage technology could be installed at your current building or buildings, and start working with an energy storage company to show the cost, forecast electricity bill savings, and look at what a system design could be for your building or buildings. This is really one of the fastest ways to show the benefits of energy storage when you pair it with renewables. And it's also an easy way to show value to your company leadership and to the bottom line. Another task or action that you can take is to talk to leadership. Talk to your executive team about going 100% renewable, including some form of energy storage by X date. Another thing that you can do is talk to emerging storage companies about doing a pilot. Many would love to do a pilot with a corporation that's looking to install their types of technologies. It's also a great way for companies to de-risk a new emerging solution, say, and to do a small test on one building. If they like the results and if they like the savings that they see, they can easily start scaling it to more buildings throughout their portfolio. If you're in a position to invest, start talking to energy storage companies about investment. Many are looking for investors now. And even if they aren't, it's always good to start those relationships early. And for individuals out there who are looking to make a difference, talk to a solar installer, see what sort of storage options that they can pair with solar for your home or your business. And finally, something else that I wanted to add is, if there are any folks out there who are wondering if there's still time to enter the energy storage market in a career capacity, I'd like to offer advice from one of my favorite authors, Kevin Kelly. You are not late. There is a lot of opportunity for growth in energy storage. We need all the help that we can get. So please, if you are interested at all, please feel free to reach out. And we look forward to working together to help us transition to 100% clean, renewable energy.
I really love that concept of you are not late. And it's so true, especially for energy storage. As you mentioned, right now, energy storage is a $1 billion a year industry, and it will soon be a $500 to $600 billion a year industry. So we're talking enormous growth potential. There are companies that are going to be gorillas in this market that haven't even been started yet. So definitely this is an exciting time, and you are not late. So that actually could be a candidate for an answer to my final question that I have for you here today, Jen. What's the most important takeaway of this presentation? If somebody watching only learns one thing today from us today, what would that be? What's the most important takeaway?
Oh, wow. We covered a lot, but I would say the most important takeaway from today's talk is energy storage is already a good investment today. You don't have to wait a few more years to see how it goes. The technology is already good. The economics work today. And for investors out there, it's not so far along that it's a mature market, but it'll soon be a $2 trillion market. Further, the technology and economics will continue to improve. We're at a Goldilocks point where it's not too early, it's not too late, and it's about to be huge.
Wow, that's a really powerful point and a great way to wrap this up. Thank you, Jen, for this interview, and thank you for all your insightful perspectives. I personally found it valuable, and I hope that the audience did too.
Thank you so much for having me, Matt, and thank you to the South by Southwest audience for attending and inviting us into your homes. We really appreciate having this opportunity with you today.
Yeah, absolutely. So we do have a little bit of time left here for a live Q&A. If we don't get to your question during the Q&A, or if you prefer to chat offline, please feel free to reach out to either of us directly via email, via our websites, or through the South by Southwest app. Our emails are jen@jennifergallegos.tech and matt@mattsparks.net, and those are our websites as well. I'll make sure to put those on the screen for you to see. And we look forward to hearing from you. Now, does anybody have any questions for us?